The old man berated himself as he rushed down the path that led to his rice paddy. The sun would be rising within an hour. He'd accidentally overslept, an error that could cost him his life. As he approached the edge of the field, he dropped to a crawl, being careful to keep the rusty rifle out of the water. He didn't know its model or even its manufacturer. He barely even knew how to shoot it. He'd been a farmer his whole life, and as the war raged on all around him, he had tended to his single ox, his rice paddy, and his small field of grain. But then the war came to him. 2 weeks ago, a squad of Viet Cong arrived in his village. The VC men looked like ordinary civilians but carried hidden weapons. They had thrust the rusty rifle into his hands. Its buttstock cracked in two and held together with wire, the barrel worn smooth from use. They had given him 20 rounds for it and told him to fire on the U.S. Marines firebase perched atop a steep hill that overlooked the village. Every evening, they would deliver 20 more rounds and collect the spent casings in the morning. If he did not produce the 20 spent casings each and every morning, they would kill his entire family. To drive the point home, they shot and butchered his ox, carrying the meat off for themselves. So for 2 weeks now, he'd faithfully lifted the antique rifle out of its hiding place under his floorboards, crawled to the edge of his field, and shot up at the top of the hill. He didn't want to hit anybody, and even if he had wanted to, he doubted the accuracy of the rifle. He just wanted to fire it, collect the casings, and leave them in the pot outside his home for the VC to collect. He just wanted his family to remain unharmed. The cold water of the paddy soaked through his clothes, weighing him down, but the old man pushed forward regardless. The rice was tall enough that it provided good cover. He knew that somewhere up above him was a Marine fighting position. He aimed high above them and opened fire, most of the rounds racing off into the night sky, a few striking rocks above the Marines, causing them to duck from the falling debris. "I got him," said Marine Sergeant Carlos Hathcock, swiveling his rifle in the direction of the muzzle flash. "Look for additional targets." Beside him, Captain Edward James Land scanned the rice paddies with his spotting scope, looking for any additional threats. The enemy was close enough that it'd be an easy shot for Hathcock, which made him suspicious. He and the rest of the snipers, 3 of the 12 or so currently operational across the entire U.S. Marine Corps, had arrived just yesterday after a successful campaign on Hill 55. They'd gotten word of a sniper opening fire on their position from down below every night for weeks now, but he never actually hit anyone. Instead, the Marines had learned to keep their heads down. It all felt wrong. A trained sniper wouldn't miss and wouldn't rattle off rapid-fire shots like that. They also wouldn't get so close to their target or hit the same one night after night. His unit of snipers was becoming famous across Vietnam, even to the enemy, who knew of Hathcock by both name and by the white feather he carried in his cap. The whole thing smelled of bait, and so Land scanned, looking for anyone waiting to ambush once Hathcock gave his position away. Hathcock's reticle settled on its target. As he peered through the scope, he could see that the shooter was older, but the pre-dawn light made it impossible to get good details. The sniper seemed to be struggling with a reload, with just an inch or so of the top of his head visible from behind the cover of the earthen wall at the edge of the rice paddy. That was all Hathcock needed. He slowly squeezed the trigger, syncing it with a natural pause in his breathing. But nothing happened. "You want to try taking the safety off?" Hathcock felt his face burning. It was a rookie mistake. He flipped the safety off and reacquired the sight picture. The .30-06 rifle barked once, and an instant later the top of the old man's head came apart from the impact of the round. The kinetic energy threw his frail body up in the air, causing him to toss the rifle away and cartwheel backwards. Hathcock had seen it happen before, but the old man's slight frame magnified the effect. Sighing, he pulled away from his rifle and crawled backwards out of his firing position, mindful an enemy sniper might be looking to nail him in return. A Marine major knocked on the door of the makeshift shelter and let himself in. Inside, Hathcock, Land, and Corporal John Roland Burke, Hathcock's favorite spotter, were gathered around a table examining the rusty rifle that had been recovered from Hathcock's last target. "Division CP's requesting your best shooter ASAP," the major said to Land without greeting or even acknowledging the other man. Apparently, there was no time for formalities. Hathcock's eyebrow shot up. Trying his best not to make it obvious he was eavesdropping. "Big op?" Land asked. "No clue, just plain messenger boy," the major responded. Land nodded. "I'd feel better sending a 2-man team." The major mulled it over for a moment. "Seems fine by me, but that's Division's call to ultimately make." As the major left, Land turned to Hathcock and Burke. "Best grab your packs and be ready for a long op in the bush. I'll try to get details if I can." Despite the grim atmosphere moments earlier, both Burke and Hathcock felt a growing sense of excitement. Being out in the bush on a mission beat sitting here stewing over this morning's tragedy. "Sergeant Hathcock, I want you to kill someone for me. Do you have any problem with that?" Hathcock blinked. He didn't recognize the colonel standing before him, but it was clear from the man's demeanor he wasn't rank and file. This man was Special Forces, and Special Forces got up to some real nonsense in the bush. Yes, sir, who's the target, NVA or VC? Neither. Hathcock paused. He wasn't North Vietnamese or Viet Cong. This was not the answer he expected. I'm sorry, sir? A foreigner collaborating with the enemy. I need him dead, yesterday. Can you do this? Why don't the Arvin just arrest him, sir? The colonel shook his head, and Hathcock thought he sensed disappointment at the question. But if he was going to take a life, especially one that South Vietnamese couldn't or wouldn't, then he wanted to know it was for the war's ultimate good. Sergeant, this Frenchman is an enemy collaborator. Heavy set, approximately 6 feet tall. Won't be easy to miss him. Can you do this job? Yes, sir, I'll get your man. The colonel nodded approvingly. Excellent. Once you've killed him, you need to leg it immediately. Chopper will fly you in and out. But you have to hump it 5 kilometers to the site and 5 back again. You'll insert pre-dawn. We know where he's going to be and when he's going to be there. Make sure you get there first. Aye, aye, sir. 2 Hueys were already spinning up their rotors, waiting for Hathcock, Land, and Burke. The captain called out over the growing whine of the Huey's engines and the chop of their blades. I'll be with the recon team 2 clicks away, but make no mistake, you're in this alone. We can't come get you and artillery can't reach. You get made, you're on your own. So as soon as you drop him, you beat feet back to the chopper. And mind you're quick. Soon as you shoot, NVA is going to be swarming the entire area. And the chopper boys might get jumpy, so don't make them wait. Captain, why are we killing this Frenchman? The sounds of the rotors was now full-blown as both Hueys prepared for departure. Captain Land shook his head vigorously. I don't know, but if it wasn't critical, then they'd be greasing this guy some regular old way. Don't miss. Bert grinned as he moved toward the Huey he and Hathcock would take deep into enemy territory. Never do, Captain. Burke and Hathcock picked their way through the jungle at a brisk but deliberate pace. Each step was carefully calculated to ensure they disturbed the jungle as little as possible. They had no clue where they were, and even less clue if Charlie was running patrols through here. They had gone in with zero intelligence. Whoever this Frenchman was, the United States of America wanted him dead in a real bad way, as soon as humanly possible. But that meant that he and Burke were in deep. The map showing their way to their firing position had been cut out from a larger map and laminated, making it impossible to know where exactly they were. Such limited information could mean only one thing. Some 3-letter agency was behind this op, and if Hathcock had to guess, it would be CIA. At least the night had no moon, plunging the countryside into deep black, perfect for sneaking through. They moved down a gentle slope from the landing site and then followed a stream that flowed down a long gully. The gully would lead them straight to their shooting position, significantly simplifying their journey, but it also meant they were completely boxed in if an enemy patrol happened to be wandering by on the high ground. Hathcock went over various contingency plans and kept arriving at the same conclusion. If the enemy got the jump on them, their best bet was to leg it back to the chopper. Any other scenario ended in death or capture. By the time the sun began to rise around 5:30 a.m., Burke and Hathcock had been in their firing position for half an hour already. They had used netting and leaf litter to enhance their camouflage, becoming almost invisible. Once Hathcock took his shot, though, it wouldn't take long to figure out where the shooting was coming from. 2 kilometers away, perched on a hilltop, Captain Land and the recon team surveyed the route that Hathcock would have taken. It had been a point of pride that despite knowing the precise time and direction of travel, nobody on the recon team had caught a glimpse of Burke and Hathcock settling into their firing position. Either your shooter is as good as you say he is, or he's dead already. Land hadn't caught the name of the mustachioed man in the Arvin-style tiger-striped uniform. Other than being obviously American and sporting long bushy sideburns, he knew nothing about him, but everything screamed CIA. He's good, Lance told him. The CIA man hoped that was the case, or 3 Americans were going to have a very bad afternoon. Land adjusted himself to edge slightly closer to the CIA man as they lay prone, peering out through a hole in the camo net with binoculars. Want to be the one to tell me what the hell we're doing here and why I just put the best sniper in the American military out in no man's land with no chance of rescue if things go sideways? The CIA man was silent for a few long moments before speaking up. No harm in it now. Old Yak down there is an interrogator, one of the best. Charlie picked up a couple of our pilots. They're taking the French frog to make an introduction. Intelligence says he's real sadistic. Takes real pleasure in torture. Why not just mount a rescue? Land asked. The CIA man shook his head. Too deep would be a disaster. So either your guy is as good as you talked him up to be, or our pilots are going to have a real bad day. 3 hours passed with the sun high in the sky. Burke and Hathcock strained every sense that they had to its limit. smelling for anything unusual, listening for human voices or disturbances in the calls of local birds. Finally, there was movement at the edge of the clearing, but on the opposite end from which the Frenchman was supposed to emerge. Hathcock swung his rifle just as a 7-man Viet Cong patrol emerged from the trees, moving unhurriedly and unworried. Looking through his scope, Hathcock confirmed that they were heavily armed. They were here to collect the Frenchman. As if on cue, he appeared at the opposite end of the trail, clearing the trees. His hands were in his pockets as he smoked a pipe, not a care in the world. Spotting the Viet Cong, he cheerfully waved. Hathcock moved his scope back in his direction. At about 300 yards, he confirmed the target based on the detailed description given to him by the colonel right before boarding the Huey. It'd be an easy shot. Looking back in the direction of the VC, getting out might be trickier. On the hilltop 2 kilometers away, Land cursed aloud. Didn't expect him this early. Thought he'd be alone. He's been every other morning. Sorry, Captain, but now we'll see just how good your shooter really is. Land didn't respond. Instead, he kept the VC patrol under watch. Hathcock moved his foot slightly to his right and found Burke's boot, tapping it twice. Burke tapped back. Hathcock moved the crosshairs over the Frenchman's chest. There was no wind. A 300-yard shot with the target presenting 3/4 towards him while moving at a slow pace. Settling into his natural breathing pattern, Hathcock breathed in and back out again, finding the natural pause. Then, he squeezed the trigger. The sharp crack caused the Viet Cong patrol to immediately dive for cover. Long before they reacted, though, Hathcock's round had crossed the empty valley and found its mark, dead center of the sternum, 10 inches below the Adam's apple. The Frenchman fell over straight onto his back. He gasped for air instinctively like a fish on dry land, but those were involuntary actions. His consciousness had already begun to fade from a combination of trauma and massive blood loss. The man gasped and choked for air. Hathcock knew there was no need for a follow-up shot, and immediately he and Burke began low-crawling through the grass back toward the stream at their backs and the gully beyond it. The VC shouted angrily, realizing that they were not under assault. The single shot convinced them that the Americans had sent a lone sniper, and now they aimed to flush him out. They began running toward the sound of the gunshot and the only likely source of cover. The 2 Marines low-crawled as fast as they could, but Hathcock knew it was pointless. They'd soon run out of cover. There was little between this patch of tall grass and the woods at the mouth of the gully. "We're gonna have to leg it," Hathcock told his spotter. Burke grunted as Hathcock stood at a crouch and began to run, Burke following closely behind. Gunfire immediately erupted and tore through the grass around them and into the trees beyond. Both the men quickly reached the edge of the woods before plunging inside. There, Hathcock grabbed Burke and spun him east, facing up toward the steep hillside that led to the top of the gully. "We gotta go up! They're going to be expecting us to follow the gully." This time, Burke didn't reply. He simply moved, throwing himself at the steep bank. Both men moved as fast as they could, having shed any piece of equipment they didn't need save for their rifles and a few pouches of ammo. Grabbing onto vegetation, they scrambled up the steep embankment, angry VC voices closing in on the mouth of the gully. The gunfire was below them, bullets tearing into vegetation leading along the stream and deep into the gully. As Hathcock had predicted, Charlie had expected them to take the obvious route down through the gully. He didn't blame them either. If one of those hot dogs happened to glance up, there was a better than even chance that they'd spot him or Burke desperately clinging to vegetation. Captain Land nervously scanned the rushing VC patrol, wishing that he'd been allowed to bring his own long gun. The rest of the recon team was hurriedly removing the camo netting and preparing to leg it back to their own chopper. "Your boy's as good as you said," the CIA man said. "Good job, Captain." "Job's not done," Land replied. "They gotta get home now." The CIA man was unusually jovial. "They'll get there." Land nodded his thanks, but his eyes and mind were still on the VC. Hathcock and Burke had reached the top of the ridgeline shortly after eliciting an explosion of Vietnamese expletives from one of the soldiers below. They'd been spotted and only a few hundred yards away. Hathcock's white feather was clearly visible. Gunfire roared out at them as they put everything they had into their mad dash. But gambling on reaching the ridgeline had been a good one. Burke and Hathcock dropped to the military crest on the opposite side where they were out of view. An additional plus was that at this elevation, the vegetation was considerably thinner, making their runs easier. The helicopter was 5 kilometers away, and the 2 Marines made it in what must have been a record-breaking 20-minute sprint, while still carrying their rifles and most of their ammo. Out of breath, the Marines didn't have to say a word to the flyboys. The sound of pursuing VC patrol meant that the rotors were already spinning by the time the Marines reached the helicopter. Hauling himself in, Hathcock reached out a hand to Burke and helped him climb on. The helicopter skids, leaving the ground a second later. The two men lay leaning against each other, fighting for breath as the jungle canopy receded below them. This mission had been a success, but the war was far from over. Now go check out Most Hardcore American Sniper, 1 Marine versus 150 enemy soldiers, or click this video instead.